Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bret Lueder Show. Today I have an amazing guest. I would call him a tech expert, tech guru. As you can see from the background, I just made the comment before the start of the show that he reminds me of Preston Nichols. I've seen some videos of the old Montauk Project whistleblower being interviewed in his like home lab, surrounded by all this equipment that he created. And we've got a similar individual today, which is why one of two big reasons why I wanted to interview Scott Hensler. Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This should be a good one.
This should be a good one, right? This is pretty exciting. So I had the pleasure of meeting you in Yarrington, Nevada, of all places, um,
Hmm.
at our mutual friend Brad Olson's 60th birthday party at the historic Santos Ranch a couple weeks ago. And what an amazing cast of characters. So it doesn't surprise me one bit that a couple would show up pulling the trailer that's absolutely loaded with top end equipment that would be perfect for anybody in case they needed to bug out somewhere for meteor hits or EMP, a tidal wave, whatever it might be. Your trailer is the most sophisticated trailer I've ever seen put together by a private person. Give us a little bit of the background behind that, and then we'll dig into what might happen and why Yarrington's important.
Well, of course, the end time events that we're all concerned about, or at least the political problems that we have in this country and just the issues around the world is very concerning. And so, being a husband and one who's familiar with the events, that I wanted to make sure that my family would be safe. And so I decided to purchase a cargo trailer. The reason I did a cargo trailer versus a camper is that a cargo trailer is encapsulated 100% with metal. Its structure is metal, it's not wood. And so that's a good start for EMP protection. And the other is the fact that it's hollowed out. I could start from the beginning, and so I did. And it was quite a job to pull the floor and put tanks in and then reassemble and then start to wire. I've got an extensive solar package in there. But what I was mostly interested in was the fact of being a ham radio operator was to have full communication that would allow me for local, state to state, and even around the world, such as shortwave radio. So what you saw when I showed you the trailer was just that, full package. Now, what I have behind me is an extension. In fact, this particular studio is actually a toy hauler. I'm in the back of a toy hauler, so I'm going along that same premise. But all this equipment here behind me is something that I've accumulated over years. But in order to get it in the trailer, the camper that I built, I had to go to a higher tech, had to go to more radios that were multi-band instead of having a radio for each band. And so it's a condensed version. But I also have 500 watt HF, which is shortwave, the communication that talks around the world capabilities, along with the solar, the inverters. You probably noticed how nice and cool that it was in there. I have the mini
Great.
split inverters running off the solar. So I did everything I could to make sure that, we could maintain, of course, generators as well. So the other thing too was, trying to figure out the best way to install everything to make it EMP proof. There's a lot of claims of devices that say they can EMP proof your car and so forth, but that we'll find that out when the bomb goes off. And so I did everything that I could within my budget to try and EMP proof it, and we'll find out when it does happen, but I'm pretty confident that at least some of it will survive. Now, some of the equipment behind me here too is older and that it's tube. And since it's tube and not transistor or integrated circuits, it's more hardy. And the Soviets and the Chinese know this too well. So they too have older equipment on standby in case there is an EMP. But when it comes to EMPs that scalar technology that is now prevalent because of the developments from Nikola Tesla that most things are probably not going to survive if it's a direct hit from a scalar EMP. But certainly we do the best that we can. I'm not going to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We'll roll the dice and see how it comes out.
Very interesting. A lot of stuff to unpack, even just right there, from the ham to the short radio to the EMP. Let's talk about ham radio for a minute. That seems to be the go-to for what I refer to as techie people, because it's an area that I'm not averse in. Um, but but ham radio is still limited, right? Because the military controls all the bandwidth, and aren't
Well,
you encroaching on ham now bandwidth?
yeah, they would love to take our frequencies. In fact, we lost some frequencies back in the 90s. If you're familiar with Senator Barry Goldwater,
Yeah.
he ran for president. He at the time when I was living in Arizona was our senator, and I happened to actually meet him, and he's who inspired me in ham radio.
Okay.
But through Congress, he put things in place to assure that we were a emergency network. You probably remember back in the old days. I don't know how old you are, but if you had to do the emergency nuclear drills of hiding underneath the desk and the civil patrol that we had for protecting America,
Right.
that he put in place laws that keep them from taking. In fact, there's MARS, which is Military Auxiliary Emergency Services, which combines with ham radio. Now, through an executive order of Trump or someone else, yeah, they could just rip those away. But right now, we're sitting pretty good. I'm actually surprised that they haven't tried to do more. And if anything, the FCC, the Federal Communications, has lessened the requirements. When I took my test back in 83, so I've been a ham now for over 40 something years, I had to do Morse code.
Okay.
Now today you don't have to do Morse code. A lot of people, that was a huge stumbling block because it's not for everybody. And then they adjusted the test to be a little broader for people to make it easier instead of just being some egghead techie guy. An average Joe, if he truly sat down and went through the courses that are there, he can get his license. And so there's like 1.5 million of us now, maybe more. I forget what the last number is. So that's a pretty strong number within the United States. And then, of course, there's several million around the world. But but as I went through and found out exactly what radio waves could do, in fact, I have 2 U.S. patents that were assigned to me back in the 90s and early 2000s that have to do with emergency communications. I was very involved in search and rescue. I was a man tracker for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And when I got out there in the field and the canyons and behind the mountains and everything to look for lost people, that the radios were terrible. They just, hams had better radios. And so I combined different technologies together to improve that, was granted the patents and manufactured antennas to enhance that communication for many years. In fact, that's what gave me the start into a lot of this. And but the point of it is that many of the people in search and rescue were ham radio operators, or they were inspired by the technologies and the things that were out there today. And by the way, radios were very complicated and very expensive, very large and very heavy. And now, of course, they've come down to a price level that people can afford. And I want to mention too that you can buy the radios and you can listen and monitor all them. You just can't transmit until you get your license. So if someone is inspired by that and wants to, feel free to do that. The other two is I don't promote it, but when things go turn left on everyone and goes bad, the FCC does allow for emergency communications for unlicensed individuals. So if you're in a flood or a fire or a vehicle accident and your cell phones aren't working, the law does allow you to use radios that when it comes to property and life. And so I see that the same way with disasters such as end times. If there's an invasion, if there's a nuclear detonation, then you at least you have the radios. You may not have been able to transmit with them when everything was okay, but I would rather see you with radios and be able to have the chance of survival through communications than to say, well, I'm not going to buy one because I don't have a license.
So what happens to somebody if they don't, or if they aren't licensed? Because I study the law a lot, right? And a license is something where you ask permission from the government, basically, to do
Yes,
something that you would normally have the ability to do otherwise. So
yes.
what happens to somebody if they're caught communicating without a license?
Well, the FCC is not as hard as one would think. They'll give you warnings. They're mostly looking for people who are interfering with communications.
Okay.
The CB jammers, right? These crazy guys that get on there and they just make a mess of things. That's really more of what they're interested in. But if you have someone who's a repeat offender, then there could be a hefty fine. They have, they'll use the FBI to come in and confiscate the equipment. They'll come in with a warrant, and so it can go real bad. But you really have to be someone that's a problematic individual before the FCC really comes down on you. And the other two is someone has to make a complaint. Now,
Okay.
there is monitoring stations in various places that the FCC listens to. And of course, with AI or with software defined radio that have the ability to scan all spectrums. In fact, this equipment on this side here is part of what that's all about. I'm not just bound to one frequency. I can listen to the whole spectrum at the same time. But really, if there are a problem and somebody complains, then the FCC has to answer to it, and that's what gets people in trouble.
Okay. Right. So we're back to your neighbor snitching on you or something, right? And it's just the whole
Something
thing
like
about,
that.
okay.
Right.
Uh,
And there are people that will abuse it. And so for us who are licensed and who are respectful to other amateur radio operators, we take our turns, we're courteous to each other. There's still people on there who have their license that just blow me away how rude and how bad they can be. Now it's a small number, but there's a certain point in time where the tolerance will finally catch up to them. And when they get a fine, they can get 10,000, 25,000. They can get a big hefty fine. So, take it serious, but if you don't abuse it, don't worry about it.
okay. So, when I was young, we do a lot of boating and travel to different places and do water skiing and that kind of water sports and stuff. And we travel with some of
Hmm.
the old guys. They had their families and they all had CB radios. And
Hmm.
they would tell me that the signal would bounce at a certain part on Earth and keep bouncing, and you never know exactly where you were going to pick up necessarily. Um, so does shortwave work like that too?
Well, a CB is in the shortwave band,
Okay.
anything below 30 megahertz. So CB is like 27, 26 megahertz. And so that's considered HF or high frequency. And so that's susceptible to ionospheric conditions, sunspots, whether it's winter, summer, night, and day. And that's called skip. And so your signal would go up. And since it's a lower frequency, it hits the ionosphere, which are different layers of particles and gas, and bounces off because it's not high enough to penetrate through it. So as it bounces off, then it comes back to Earth, which is full of minerals, or water, which has minerals in it, and
Okay.
then it would bounce back up. And so it continues around till it meets up, where someone can receive it.
Okay.
So I can use the CB, and I'm not a CBer. I do have the equipment just in case. I had my first CB when I was 13 years old. So I that's I've been in a long time. So, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, here in Nevada, I could talk to a guy in Pennsylvania or Kentucky, right? But then an hour later, he's gone. And then now it's somebody in Canada or somebody in Mexico. So it moves around all the time. And so one of the advantages of amateur radio having HF or shortwave that's within the 10, 11 meter band, which is CB, is that we can go to different bands to adjust ourselves for the time of day and the time of year. And so that is one way of confirming that we have a higher chance of making communication to someone in another state or another country versus CB, where they're bound to a certain amount of frequencies. And so they're captive to whatever the conditions are.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's higher frequencies too, the VHF, UHF, like the police use, which would be the public service bands versus what we have for amateur radio bands. They're very close to each other. They have the same concept or same activity when you transmit and receive. And so those would be more of a local communication. But uh, bringing that up, I'm going to be venturing into EME, which is Earth, Moon, Earth. So that's my next project. I'll be bouncing signals off of the moon. So the time that it takes for my radio signal to go to the moon and then come back where I can receive it, or someone else receives it somewhere else in the world, that when I give my call letters, which is KF7 ZDT, when I let go of the microphone within a second, I would hear my own call letters come back to me, and that's the bounce off the moon. So radio is actually fascinating. Now, most people, of course, are familiar with cell phones. That's all they know, especially the younger generations. So I encourage that if you're one to understand the end times, regardless, and in fact, what's interesting, we have a paranormal investigation frequency here locally in my area, and it's assigned in the FCC, and I've tried looking them up and finding out who they are, and I don't know who they are. So they've had a channel assigned to them for paranormal investigation. So it's a vast variety of individuals, not just ham radio operators or police and fire, forestry government. There's all kinds of corporations and certain organizations that have radios.
So, and this is all controlled by the military, or is it, or
Well,
FCC?
no, not the military. Well, see, the Congress was actually the ones in charge of it. And then when radio really took off, they were overwhelmed, right? You can just imagine issuing license and figuring out technology because technology was still being sought out. In fact, one of the reasons we have the frequencies is because the technology was so undeveloped when all this came about in the 20s and the 30s and even earlier
Right.
that Congress said, give them these frequencies. They'll never get out of their backyard. Well, they didn't understand ionosphere. They didn't understand skip. They didn't understand how short wave travels around the world. So that's how we got those frequencies is they gave them to us a long time ago. But then they started the federal communications. And so the FCC, now I want to state too that unfortunately, Congress also handed us over to the communications sector of, let's say, the United Nations. So in reality, they're the ones who are policing worldwide. And so the FCC now is kind of like the local law enforcement to uphold those laws. And boy, we really got screwed on that one because at any time that these, over in Europe or, whether it's the Asian countries that are in part of this, if they decide to alter and change frequencies, that'll affect us greatly. Now, I don't know how they're going to enforce it here. It's kind of like, there's so many radios here, like we have people with so many guns. I'm a gun enthusiast. I believe in the First and Second Amendment,
Right.
that how are they going to enforce it if it really gets bad? But with the FCC, they're actually the ones who then I would say control it. The military would only commandeer it if there was a issue. But I'll say this too, that Homeland Security, what was the flood in down south, the hurricane many years ago,
Oh, right.
that had
Katrina.
Saint Katrina.
Yeah.
Katrina was such a disaster that cell phones that they had at the time, because of the time the date, that the local communication for fire and police and ambulance, and of course even hospitals, they were all wiped out. So the amateurs, because we have specific groups who are dedicated ARES, amateur radio emergency services, who are trained, like myself, to come in and set up emergency communications, set up the phones to make sure that when the ambulance or the fire truck has an emergency call, that they can still talk to the doctors and so forth. And we do that. Well, guess what Homeland Security did? They brought in radio jammers and they jammed the amateur radio operators. And of course, I mean, I look back at that now and it just infuriates me, but it was showing that at the time that they thought they were the only kid on the block and they wanted to control everything. And so they jammed us. So it means they have the equipment and the technology, the ability to jam us at any time. And of course, that was a local situation. But the military in itself really is, I wouldn't worry about that so much unless there's an executive order from the president. So they just don't have carte blanche to come in. In fact, local agencies, let's say that for some reason I've got a sheriff deputy here and he takes one look in here and he doesn't know what it is, right? He freaks out thinking I'm some kind of terrorist with all this equipment,
Right.
and they come in and they raid this, my place. Well, guess what? Then I make a call to the FBI because I am a licensed amateur radio operator. They do not have jurisdiction, and it has happened before in one call to the FBI, and the FBI calls the local agency, such as police or sheriff, saying, you know what, boys, you got to give it back. You don't have the right. There's nothing here. It's just radio equipment. They are licensed to operate just like anyone's licensed to carry,
Right.
concealed carry firearm. And so they've had to give the equipment back. And it's kind of a shame that this technology, for instance, there's so few people that really know of it as a whole, especially the younger generation, because the schools will no longer allow our amateur radio clubs to come in and teach the kids.
Wow.
And so Reno is a great example of that, that the school districts, now we've got some great amateur radio clubs around here that we call them Elmers. And an Elmer is a name for a guy that's willing to teach a younger person or a new person in amateur radio to come in and teach about emergency communications. And they have flat out refused they will not allow that curriculum to be within the schools. And it just tells you that just how they're trying to control. They want us to be on cell phones. They want us to that way they can shut everything. And GPS is the same way too. In fact, some of our radios, some of the ones I have back here, are capable on a screen of locating where the person is that I'm talking to on my radio. And
Interesting.
that comes in handy if I'm working with somebody who's broke down or they're hiking and they turn their ankle and their cell phone won't work, but yet they have a 2 meter and they're able to transmit. So we have those abilities and they want to take those away. So they could shut the cell phones off and they could shut the GPS off. And that would really be a disaster for all of us. And in fact, GPS is encrypted. So they're not really shutting it off. They're just changing the encryption that our devices no longer are able to decipher, the coordinates.
Okay.
So
And how many of us know how to re-encrypt that kind of technology? Probably not very many of us.
yeah, not very many, especially with the encryption lines, 256 or whatever. I mean, there's no way you'd ever figure it out. And if you did, that would put you back online for them to know that you're using it. So
Okay.
yeah.
So can I guess that this kind of regulation happens with the internet as well? And do you have like outside the normal internet kind of abilities in your array of equipment there?
Yeah, again with the short wave, there's many programs. See, here's what's interesting, from the very start about amateur radio. is that it really was the engineers, it really was the technicians that when they'd leave RCA or General Electric and go home for the day, they'd go in their garage and say, well, my supervisor won't let me do this, and so I'm going to do it myself. And
Right.
so they were the pioneers. And it's the same thing today. We've got people who can write programs, they're software engineers and digital. They know microprocessors, and so they've interfaced amateur radio with software, and so we're able to send emails, we're able to send text, we're able to send pictures, PDFs and graphs, and without cell phone technology. So yeah, we're ready for that. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. So all this is in preparation for what may or may not happen in the future. You've named a couple things: a nuclear blast, an EMP, an invasion. What is it that you can? I also know that you saw our friend, my new friend Everett Triplett, give his presentation at Brad's little.
Uh-huh.
We affectionately call it the Brad Talk. 15 minutes. Amazing. I think he probably was like 25 minutes. It was so amazing. Brad just let him go. What is it that you think is going to happen in the future?
Well, it's interesting you brought up Everett Triplett. He approached me many years ago. Well, it's been 3 years ago, and laid the money down, and I went in with about $23,000 and put a whole communication command center in for his area that he lives in.
He showed
And
it to me. Incredible.
yeah, so you did well. Good,
It
good, because I
reminded
put
me
a
of the
lot of
movie. It reminded me of the movie with Charlton Heston, The Omega Man.
yeah,
Remember that movie
yeah,
where he had his own compound set up? Anyway,
that's right.
continue.
Yeah,
It was incredible. So yeah,
yeah. Well, I like I say, I was able to just do what I wanted to do, and it was the station that I always wanted to build. So everything in there was new. And the point of it is that, as I said before, with the roll of the dice, there's always the possibility that communications with the right suppression to keep the EMP out, that it'll still be usable. And then, of course, a lot of the radios too are kept in Faraday cages. A plain old, and this is, I'm glad we're bringing this up. You can go down to the hardware store and buy a galvanized garbage can, just like the old garbage cans we used to have in the old days before the rubber ones came along. And you can put your equipment in there and put that lid on nice and tight, and it is just as EMP proof as anything else that you could buy out there.
wow,
Or go down to a thrift store and buy an old microwave, right? They've all, there's a stack of microwaves. Take it home, cut the power cord off. Don't worry about using it as a microwave, and throw your handheld radios into the microwave because it's a Faraday cage. It's designed to keep the microwave from coming out to you, just as it will do to keep the EMP from getting to your radios.
okay,
So there's a lot of things that you can do just for a few dollars to protect your equipment. So with that in mind, the way that I built that, it encompasses many people that are within his community, along with myself, that have handhelds and bases and mobiles throughout the community to be able to communicate back to what he calls the command center. And so the point of it is that if there's a mass migration of people leaving California, if there are areas that are in need that we can go to and still communicate, because he's also a prepper, and so he probably showed you that.
he did.
And so we're pretty much ready to help a lot of people, not just a handful. We're talking about thousands. And so that was really the main idea behind it. And one thing about HF radio too, by the way, instead of just VHF, UHF, is that nuclear fallout is a very noisy generation of static noise. So you can imagine, if you probably remember driving underneath power lines with your AM radio on in your car and you could hear the static.
Sure.
A lot of the radios out there are going to be like that at the higher frequencies. And so the military themselves also know that the lower frequencies, like the short wave, the HF, the high frequency, that that if it comes down to that the noise level is so high that Morse code will most likely be what makes it through that static noise during fallout.
Interesting.
So I've prepared the same thing for him. We have several shortwave radios with Morse code keys, along with audio, of course. But that's what the government, or I should say, the military, is betting on. That if anything's going to get through, it's going to be HF. And there'll be people who will deny that or say, they've got servers up. I'm sorry, anything with a long wire, which is going to be like an antenna, that's what's going to be vulnerable. In fact, what I do for my antenna switches is when I am not using them, I turn them to ground, and I've got a ground outside that I've prepared. So anything that comes in will come down the coax and not go to my radios, it'll go to ground. And then I have fuse links just in case there's a high surge that they'll blow in hopes that the radio equipment will be saved. And I did the same thing for Everett's equipment. In fact, that was one of the bigger expenses was to maintain, especially with lightning strikes, because the other thing we're going to have is very bizarre weather. And so lightning, um, whether it's static lightning in the air, fork lightning, ball lightning, whatever different types that are out there, that's going to be prevalent too. So that'll be very hard on radio equipment.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, so we got about let's see, about 7 minutes for this segment. We're coming back for our second segment, and we want to talk about your podcast, The Grumpy Exorcist, because that's a whole nother thing involving frequencies, ironically. Um, but
Yes.
why Yarrington? Is Yarrington perceived as a place that is going to be untouched, or is it just a place that you guys, since that's where you are, you're going to prepare no matter where you are? That kind of strategy. Is there something special about Yarrington?
Well, it's just dumb luck that I'm here, and then I just happened to run into Everett at a restaurant in Gardnerville. But the ability for Walker River water to flow through there, and that the ground soil is very fertile, and that the mechanisms are already in place for intense farming, makes it ideal for survivability, to be able to grow food, to have water. And one of the things too is Everett has a great array of solar um, trailers that can be hooked up to run wells to pull water out of the ground. So that would be one of the things to say that it is a prime spot. That of course he wasn't born there, but he was raised there, and so he has a heart for the community. And then I've made friends, so it looks like this is probably where I'm going to stay, and so I'm going to offer and do what I can. And so the resources again, I supply the electronics and the radios and the electrical, and they feed me. What a deal, right?
I can't help but think it's not a coincidence, right? I think the good Lord is leading people together in preparation for this. So to pit you with Everett together, and the different strengths that you guys both bring to the table, I see that as a powerful combination in a spot that's got the basic resources, the water and the soil, and it's just incredible. I don't feel like it's a coincidence that I came to Yarrington and met you guys.
Yeah.
I think it's a coincidence that our friend Brad Olson, is there.
Hmm.
And I think we're being led to the things that are going to give us a chance to survive whatever is coming. Um, what do you think about this? We got about 4.5 minutes. My theory is that if humanity actually got together, or enough of us got together and lived the right way, and prayed, meditated, and changed our thoughts to be positive, and started just being in service to everybody, that it would drastically change what may happen in the future. Do we have that? Do
Absolutely.
humans have that power?
Well, they do, but again, it needs to be Christ driven.
Okay,
Because the demonic forces that are out there, which will be part of our next show here,
that's right.
is divided man, divide and conquer. There are unfortunately different factions within, whether you want to call them alien, whether you want to call them fallen angels, they're evil. They certainly do not. Now, there some will think that there are some that have our best interest, and that may be the case. But the point of it is we cannot deny that there are evil factions out there that
Right.
wish to destroy us. And so, unfortunately, that has taken place to a point that many people are not coming back to. It's kind of like a sociopath where they really don't have a love of fellow man, not necessarily to a point of being a quote psychopath, but the love of many will wax cold as we see in Scripture, and so that's where we're at. But is there good people? Absolutely. Is there the ability to come together? I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think so. And by the way, the things that are coming are really meant for the wicked. And that's another thing we need to remember, that the judgment that comes down on those who practice such things, I believe, is actually they've got a great um, they're going to be taken to the woodshed. And yes, there's going to be problems for all of us. No one gets away with anything, but we still have a chance. I say as long as we draw breath in this earth, yes, we can turn around. And prophecy is based on the fact, like in Book of Revelations, that they wouldn't repent. Right? You've got people who just won't turn back to God, and there's a final judgment for it.
Right.
But then there are those who do turn to God.
Right.
And so that's what we're betting on and what we're focusing on. And I'm looking forward to, this is why I've done the ministry that I've done for so long, and it's why I call it Scott Hensler Network, the main parent. The show is called Grumpy Old Exorcist, but the point is to network together because we're going to need each other. We pray for each other. Where two or more are gathered in the midst, Christ is at, and so that's what I'm betting on. Yes.
And I get the impression that as I learn about Jesus and the teachings and how to really live my life, um, we're in service to others.
Hmm.
And if they're not going to repent, then we still don't judge them, don't scold them, let them go on their way, and then we help the people that want to be helped, and we share our information with the people that want to hear it, and then I think you make a great point. The end times are meant for the wicked, but at the same time, I think we can minimize that by the way we live our lives. And being in service, I
Yes.
think, creates that mentality to where I don't know if you want to call it a shield or something, but it kind of shields us. Like there may be chaos going around us, but here we are. We got what we need to live. We got the families taken care of. And we got 30 seconds left. Where can people get a hold of you? Are you available to talk to people, or are you just selective as like where can we get your show? How's that?
Well, if you go to Google or any of the search engines and just put on my name, Scott Hensler,
Okay.
Hensler,
Okay.
you could put in scotthensler.com or scotthensler.network.org,
10
and it'll
seconds.
take you right to my website, and then you
Okay.
can link from there.
And we're coming right back with the more incredible or with the incredible more with the incredible Scott Hensler. Scott, thank you for your time. We'll see you shortly.
Okay.